by dictatorship. So the chances of military intervention succeeding are slim. And so if we are interested in democratization, if that is our problem, then I think we have to try every possible way to push in the direction of extending the time within which soft interventionism can work. I grant, in the case of Saddam, this was not a very hopeful strategy. In the case of Saddam, I would stress, and I think that Christopher has grossly neglected it, that the inspection process and the United Nations process of actually fairly hard, soft intervention, as this very last inspection process was, has not only disarmed Saddam, but was on the verge of destabilizing the regime altogether. And this, I think, could have been continued. I'm not suggesting that the outcome would have been perhaps anything more than a neo-Baath state, but perhaps a neo-Baath authoritarian state would have been a possible terrain for soft interventionism. Who knows? Anyway, prospects for democratization to the method that we have chosen are poor. Historically, they have been poor, and they are extremely poor in Iraq. You know, President Talabani, you can't, you know, that's not analysis to tell me that the president is this wonderful man. You know, you may know him, I don't know him, he's very attractive and he's charming and all the rest. But that doesn't mean anything. You know, you have to look at the political situation now, which is really dismal. You know, you say we should stay, but we're almost at the point of shooting at our own troops who really, in some situations, no longer know which side they're actually fighting on. And I can give you illustrations of that if you're interested. And you probably know what I mean, because you know Ahmed Chalabi, whom you probably know personally. There was one incident when literally his Pentagon guard was almost shot at by CIA troops, and they had to be called off just an hour earlier so that wouldn't happen. We are on the verge of incidents like that now in Iraq. So the situation is really fairly dismal. You know, you can't just say, well, Talabani is president. He is president. But the process of democratization is going extremely poorly.
Thank you. At the end, can you?
Well, I think there were two challenges to me there, so I don't want anyone to think I would avoid them.
You'll get a chance at the end. How about?
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I have a question for you. As I understand it, your argument for the war, and as you laid it out, is about the need for regime change, right? And it's always been that way. It's been consistently that way. Are there other countries that might meet this criteria for intervention? Should it be the U.S. that does the invading?
If you remember the four criteria I advanced, I don't think there is any other country that meets all four of them. The North Korean famine is a terror famine in some ways. I don't think it quite rises to the level of genocide. Of course, it's true that North Korea has openly and disgracefully flouted the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but North Korea holds South Korea hostage. We can't even make a conventional attack without appreciating that, given the irrationality that always accompanies totalitarian rule, that North Korea might not decide to go out by destroying the city of Seoul, now the capital finally of a democratic ally, which it can do with conventional weaponry alone. But that's only a limiting case. No, I don't think there is or was another case of such a regime violating all four of these criteria and also becoming increasingly unstable, volatile, and irrational, to the point where it seemed to be an emergency. But I think I could be much clearer on the question of should it be the United States. Suppose now, to return to Chapter 7 and the United Nations, suppose that General Romeo Dallaire, the very brave Quebecois Canadian commander of the UN contingent in Kigali, whose faxes we have, and anyone can look them up, was sent urgently from his command post in Kigali, saying that with the help of some dissident Hutu forces, liberal Hutu, he had discovered, as indeed he had, the exact time and place and date and disposition of the beginning of the genocide, which was as you know, no outbreak suddenly of ethnic hatred, but a very coldly and carefully planned operation. That he discovered this time and date and place, and that he proposed the UN forces be quickly doubled, which would be from about 200 to about 400, and a démarche made to the Rwandan government to the effect that we knew what was in their mind, that there was a chance at least of forestalling it enough for a proper operation to be mounted. Now suppose those faxes, which landed on Kofi Annan's desk, were addressed to him personally and never got off that desk. Let us imagine that they had been put before the UN as an urgent matter, as eventually in a form they were by, I believe, a resolution of the Czech Republic, that action be taken immediately to forestall the genocide in Rwanda. What government do you think would have got the mandate to execute that resolution? Well, the question answers itself, does it not?
Only we have the plane.
Who has the planes, the heavy lifting stuff that's needed for the medicine, for the trucks, for the food, for all the rest of it? Who has the special forces that would have had to, don't be in any doubt about this, would have had to open fire at some point on the Hutu power militia, would have had to shed blood, would have had to show force, would have had to say this far and no further? Who's going to do? You know, everyone knows who it would have to be. But of course, that knowledge is the one that convicts the United States of being unilateralist. So
No.
I leave it there.
Why?
Well, because only the United States can do it, because only the United States can propose it and carry it out, its actions are by definition always described as unilateralist. The day I hear the New York Times refer to the French threat of a veto, a single French veto, as unilateralist, I'll change my tone.
Excuse me for a second. For example, I said, and I'm not the only one who's ever said this, that had they gotten a moral majority of the council, for example, for Kosovo, I think, you know, it was just a Russian veto. And I said, for me, that changes a lot, because it does mean something that when the majority of the Security Council, the overwhelming majority, votes one way, that this veto, which is now an absolute institution, in my mind at least, stops the action. That's quite different than in this particular case when you can only get 4 or 5 countries to support it. So that's the unilateral would be is when 1 or 2 countries decide, and then they put together a coalition of willing from whoever you find, you know, around the block. That's unilateral.
Or NATO, as in
but
the
NATO
Kosovo.
doesn't support the Iraq war.
I think you'll find that the Chinese were also willing to veto any intervention to restore the status quo ante and legal and moral in Kosovo.
I have a question for Andrew that actually addresses this a little bit. Can you tell us more specifically, or I guess what do you think about the claim that it was the U.S. who was enforcing UN resolutions?
Well, it's just wrong. Because, you know, first of all, it's interesting how the United States, actually, U.S. government never felt the need to give legal justification for the war. There's no white paper or anything else. You know, here the U.S. government spoke the language of power politics. It was different in Britain, in your country or your ex-country, because there was this Lady Falconer and whoever else, this other gentleman who wrote a paper under the name of the Attorney General, making an argument, which I'll turn to in a second. But this was not the thing that was submitted by the Attorney General to the Prime Minister. What he actually submitted was that the legality of this thing doesn't look very good, and he made an argument similar to what most international lawyers in this case make, namely that the initial Gulf War is the security